Good morning, everyone. Here we are continuing our Ananda way of life based on the guideline of conduct for members of the Sevaka order. And look, I said the whole thing without having to look at the title again. When I used to travel, there was a period of time before I moved to Ananda Palo Alto where I lived at Ananda Village, but my work was actually to teach in other places, mostly up and down the coast and of the U.S., the West Coast. And every time they would set up the program, there was a standing mic. We didn't have these radio mics. And I had to watch, we would put up the mic, I would look, and then I would pull it back about 6 inches. And I would step back from the audience like that. It was like I was there to do it, but just some part of me wanted to reserve the right to say no, and I would exercise it by pulling it back just a few inches. Every time I can't remember the name of this, it's like, just commit yourself to it. Asha, you know what you're doing here. It's very funny how the mind works. I mean, of course, this is my life. This is what I want to do. When I was out traveling, of course, I wanted to stand in front of those people and talk. But I just wanted to keep this little bit of control. And actually, finally, when I finally realized it, I stopped doing it. Just as an exercise in Master said, no, Jesus said, when the karma comes to you, you step into it. You don't step back from it. And it's so interesting to watch in our lives how a little piece of us always just wants to step back from it. And I think the difference between the average person and the great master is that there's nothing in them that resists. I mean, I carry on in a perfectly cooperative manner, but that sort of holding that little touch of resistance is very, very interesting to me. When I was having trouble writing, and I was talking to Swami once about it, he remarked to me, he said, in all his years of writing, he just said, I never have writer's block. And writer's block is so common, everybody knows it. Everybody tries to write. One very well-known writer said, thank goodness for writing publication deadlines, or else I'd never get my housework done. And anyone who tries to write, most people know exactly what that means. Before I can actually do it, I have to resist in all these other ways. One writer put it, she said, when I sit down to write, I hear somewhere in the house a piece of chocolate is calling my name. It's just like anything but actually doing it. And I'm not telling you that I don't enjoy talking to you every morning, because I do. I've gone to great trouble to maintain this every day. And by that, I don't mean difficulty, but here I am at Ananda Village. This is spiritual renewing. I could easily have just said, oh, I'm out of town. But I didn't want to. I really want to do this. But every time I sit down, I can't remember the name of the book. We're just funny bunny critters, is what I'm really trying to say. And I'm going to finish a thought from yesterday. I know I haven't prayed yet, but we will. We'll consider yesterday's prayer to be operative on this one. When I was talking about the necessity, no, I'm going to pray first because this is going to get too long. Heavenly Father, Divine Mother, Friend, Beloved God, Jesus Christ, Babaji Krishna, Lahiri Mahashaya, Swami Sri Yukteswar, Beloved Master Paramhansa Yogananda, Saints of all religions, dearest friend Swami Kriyananda, humbly we bow to you all. Bless us that we find courage in our hearts to open ourselves to your presence, whatever form it takes, whatever requests are made of us, whatever triumph or defeat that entails, that with the same gratitude for your guiding presence, we accept, we rejoice, we endeavor to do our best, and then we continue our journey on to thee. Om. Peace. Amen. Yesterday, the topic that we discussed was the necessity to concentrate your reading on teachings mostly related to this path or compatible with this path. I won't repeat everything that I said, but it was so interesting at the end of it. I mean, such a requirement of those who have decided to become disciples is almost always talked about as loyalty to the guru, loyalty to the organization, loyalty to whatever you might be saying. It's always talked about as loyalty to this external reality, and that's why you do it. The nature of Ananda, and I have to simply say the genius of Swamiji's spiritual guidance and profound and deep understanding of human nature, is that even though after now 50 years of developing this Ananda and it's become a worldwide entity, every effort is made to define Ananda from the heart of each individual. And whatever external form it begins to take, that is the result of the development of each individual. It's not that the form becomes fixed and then our development happens because we fit ourselves into that form. It just seems like a small difference, but it's everything. It's a complete difference. Swami's planted so many clues also, but clues in the things that he's written. Because I write this whole thing about it, read this whole thing, which is just 3 paragraphs about, how important it is. And I talked about the difference between information and attunement yesterday. I'm not going to go back to that. But what I didn't say, which I feel is important to say, it's not that you ought to do this, that you should do this, that you're required to do this. It's that if you're looking at it from the right angle, you'll want to do this. And so what we're trying to create among ourselves is we're trying to awaken within ourselves the natural love of the heart, as Sri Yukteswar calls it. I, visiting here at Ananda Village as I am, I've had the opportunity to see some old friends, and having been 50 years in the same spiritual family, I'm gradually moving into the 3rd generation of families that I've known for a long time. So I had the opportunity to meet, the family doesn't think of me this way, but I think of me this way. I'm the great-grandmother to these tiny children. And it just was, now let's see, why would I be saying that? Oh, I didn't have to try to care about them. It's not like I should care about these children. They're, in practical life, they're extremely distant from my ordinary life. But there's a spiritual thread that runs from my heart, at least, through the whole family. So I was eager to see the children, just eager to sort of at least know them for a few minutes before they go on to their destiny, which is not likely to be interwoven with mine. But I didn't have to try. We all understand that you don't have to try. You want to do this. You want to get down on the floor and read a book. You want to hear about the little concerns, the charming childlike concerns. You don't have to try. You want to. Well, because it's a love relationship. It's the natural love of the heart. So the whole of the guidelines for the Ananda way of life is designed to foster the natural love of the heart so that behavior does not have to be mandated from the outside, but rises spontaneously from the inside. So the last word after Swami's told us how we should concentrate is that we should be loyal to the choice we have made. In other words, this is my love relationship, and I want that relationship to flourish. Think of it in human terms. If you marry someone, if you have a child, if you develop a friendship, if you become a teacher or a mentor or an assistant cook, it's like it's a choice you've made. And you want to put energy into your choice. That's what it means to be loyal to it, to put energy into it so it'll thrive. And we all know that our relationships thrive if we put energy in them. And if we're disloyal to them, if we don't consider them important, then they wither. So we come into being disciples always with this great flourish of incredible joy. And one of the many, many things that I thank God for every day in my life is the very good karma I have that for most of my 50 years, really for all of it, I've had the opportunity to tell other people about these teachings. Just from very early on, I just was able to do that. I found, and I also had the job. I called myself a translator of Swami Kriyananda, even though he spoke impeccable English, which was the language we all spoke, and other languages, but to us, he almost always spoke English because that's all we spoke at the time. But his intentions sometimes were subtle. I mean, that's exactly what I'm doing right here. I just take what's there and then I expand upon it, or I try to point it out. But I found notes from like 1972. I came in 1971, and I'm part of satsangs at Ananda village, and I see my notes, and I'm talking about things Swami said, and I'm doing exactly what I'm doing now. I'm just adding more words to the story, so that his rather concise way of saying it, we can sort of see how it grows. So I always know what a miracle it is to find this teaching. I've never been cursed to be just a fish swimming in water and not knowing that you're swimming in water. Like it just becomes common, because I've always lived in conjunction with the greater world, and I've often been the first person to tell someone about these teachings. And every time I get to do that, I remember. It's almost like we talk about AD, which is after death, when you're talking about Jesus' crucifixion. I would call it, definitely it was death, and then after resurrection, it would be AR, because death was when nobody around me seemed to have the faintest clue as to what life was about, and then discovering what life was about. Now, of course, between the discovery and the arrival, can be a big distance, and that's what tires everyone out. But it needn't, if we keep these feelings fresh within us. So what I also wanted to say about this choice was, at the end of the life of Christ, Jesus started saying, "Eat my body and drink my blood." Now we have the benefit of all these centuries later, and we have the Catholic Church, starting with the Catholic Church, but all the churches. Here's the blood is the wine, here's the bread, which is the body, and that's what Jesus himself did at the Last Supper. "Do this in remembrance of me," he said. Here's the wine, here's the bread. So we have a whole explanation of the blood and the body, and we don't have to wonder about it. But in the Bible, I have lots of favorite parts of the New Testament. This is definitely one of my favorites. Jesus just started saying this to people. He'd been giving them a very reasonable teaching, and they were all sort of enamored and caught up in it. All of a sudden he's saying, "You have to eat my body and drink my blood." No explanation. Now, Master gives us a mystical interpretation. The body, Jesus' body was all of creation, so the body is the vibration of Om, and the blood is the life force of Christ consciousness flowing through it. So eat my body and drink my blood for yogis means to hear the Om vibration and rise into the Christ consciousness. Jesus didn't give them any of that. We know this because this is what it says in the gospel. Jesus is telling them to do this, and at least the translation I read, which I love because of this, the disciples said one to another, "This is a hard teaching." And it's so, because I lived so many years with Swamiji, with an ever-changing parade of marvelous personalities, and just the whole incredibly delightful golden age that I got to live through, I can just see it. I've been in crowds where people say about Swami, "What the heck is he talking about? How are we supposed to do this?" This is a hard teaching. And from that point, many walked with him no more. Because he was a controversial character. They didn't, it's all been neatly tied up and decided now. You don't need a lot of intuition. You don't have to have a lot of intuition. You can just take the word of 100 million Catholics or whoever they are that you're going to believe. But then he was just a renegade rabbi who was being attacked by the power structure of the religion they all followed. Eat my body, drink my blood? And I don't think so. This was fun for a while, but I'm out of here at this point. Now, at the end of Master's life, a lot of people started leaving the ashram. And Swamiji was the head of the monks, became quite alarmed. Was he doing something wrong? What was going on? And Master just says, Satan is testing the organization. And Swami said, oh, I didn't know what was happening. And as it turned out, you see, in both cases, it was the end of the incarnation of the Master. And the Master had the magnetism to just hold people, that he could hold people directly to him and guide it, and he could keep a lot of renegade sheep within the pen. But Master knew, and Jesus knew. Jesus' demise was, of course, très dramatic, and then all this persecution set in next. Jesus knew that he wasn't going to be there to be able to hold hold people strong enough, and those who were determined to follow him were going to be severely tested, and they needed to be very strong. They couldn't have within themselves waffling renegades who really didn't understand, who weren't really in tune. He had to clean house. Yogananda the same. He had to clean house so that there would be a powerful force. He wasn't discarding those disciples. He was just shifting their locale so that the greater good could be served, because he wouldn't be there to hold them. So here's what Master said about what Jesus was doing. He said, you would think, and that's how the disciples who left interpreted it, it was a test of who Jesus was. Is this guy really the Messiah? Is his teaching really in keeping with Moses and Abraham and all those who came before? Has he really come to fulfill the scriptures as we've been following it? Or is he just a nutcase, or a charlatan, or a self-serving something? Who is this guy? Master said it was the opposite. What was being tested was their faith in their own intuition. Because that's what they needed. Because they were controversial while Jesus was still alive, but they were going to be exiled from their community and hunted down, and for the most part martyred. And you can't endure something like that just because other people thought it was a good idea. You have to know it all the way through. It has to simply be, there's no, what else? There is no other truth but this. It's an interesting question, if you woke up in the morning and you were the only Christian, would you still be a Christian? Where does our confidence in our spiritual teaching come from? Does it come from the comfortable life we have and all the people who do it with us? Or does it come from an unshakable core of my experience? So in this period of time at the end of the life of Christ, Jesus, in the New Testament, it says, Jesus says to Peter, will you also leave me? And there's no context given to that question, but I bring it into the real life that I lived with Swami, which I think is applicable. I feel like I understand what the atmosphere around Jesus was from living with Swami and hearing him talk about living with Master. And there's a natural humanity to it that is often missed, in the novels and in the movies. It's just that these were people just working through their reality. So here we are with Peter. From this point, many walked with him no more. People are talking behind their backs that Jesus, started out well, but he seems to have lost his marbles. All this adulation seems to have gone to his head. There's a lot of talk. There must be a lot of talk. So did Peter's best friend leave? Did his brother leave? Did his father? Did his wife? What position was Peter in? Because there must have been a reason why Jesus asked him. If everybody that have been your best friends have now decided to leave, I've lived through 50 years of Ananda. People that I was very close to, some of them are not here anymore. You know, I've seen husbands and wives have to separate. Some are here, some are not. You know, people that you are committed to, but then suddenly you're confronted with the choice between what you are doing spiritually and what that human commitment is. Now, there's nothing in the Bible that tells us where Peter was standing, but I think it was happening, or it could have been. Otherwise, why would Jesus have asked him? And he said, "Will you also leave me?" And we can't imagine that Jesus was weeping and begging to be accepted and loved. And it couldn't also, I don't think it would have been angry. "Will you also leave me?" None of that makes sense. The question would have to have been, he just wanted to know. "Oh, Peter, what are you going to do?" Because the test was of the disciples' ability to be loyal to the choice they'd made because they knew why they had made it. And Peter answers perfectly, "Where would I go?" And the power of that answer is not, "Oh, I know what you mean by eat my body and drink my blood, and it means this, and there's going to be a church, and we're all going to do this." None of that was there. And the Last Supper hadn't happened yet either when he broke the bread and put out the wine. Who knows? You know, so much is not in the Bible. We just have just little windows open up and we look into it. Where would I go, Lord? And that's an answer worth meditating on. Because if in our hearts we think there's a place to go other than by the side of the Master that we have come to know is our doorway to the infinite. And I'm not just talking about the physical side, but within our hearts. Master said, "To those who think me near, I will be near." There's two meanings to that. One, whose thoughts are upon me, they will draw me to them. But also those who think I am near, those who believe that I am close, who receive me. But if we imagine that there's some place to go, that's the whole point of the test. So that's the choice we've made. And how deep is that choice? That's over many years. I'm here at Ananda Village, and I consider this my childhood home. I lived here for 16 years, from like the age of 24 to almost 40. But, till 40, actually. But it was I was brought up here. I mean, I got my body from my parents, but I got my life from here. And this was my childhood home. So it causes me to think over long spans of time. And I reflect because I'm staying in the house of friends, and I used to come into this house many, many times from the age of 24 to 36, or a little after, because it wasn't built at the beginning. It was built during those years. But then I naturally just, all these memories come through on these feelings of the flow of energy. And there's many ways to, what do you say, encapsulate, a long spiritual history. My best encapsulation still is don't quit. That's my best spiritual advice to everyone. Just don't quit. But what I realize is that every step of the way has been a question of where else could I go. And I've never thought of physically separating myself, so it's not. I'll just take my parents' inheritance and buy a little farm somewhere. It's not that kind of where would I go, but it's the clinging to alternatives, which is just like Yanamata said, just her gradual realization that even those things that were right, there was nothing wrong with it in itself, except that she was holding on to it. She was holding onto it as an alternate source of comfort, whether that was her little room or her little thoughts or her little resentments. I mean, she doesn't articulate it. I'm just extrapolating from my own experience. You know, my little past life, somebody owes me an apology, whatever it might be, anything that I'm afraid of, anything that I don't want to lose. And this is what the path is. We have to be loyal to our choice. And the choice that we've made is God realization. No, God is no tyrant. He's very sympathetic. I love to contemplate the fact that the masters who sit on the altar, including Babaji, which is quite something to think about that, they are all jivas. They are all individual souls manifested from the divine who fought their way up from delusion to God realization. Now, in the realm of time, time seems big. And so it's just kind of hard to think about. Master said he remembered himself back to the level of a diamond. And I had all these questions about being a diamond, including how long does it take to stop being a diamond? And then there was a whole cascading series of other questions, which I never got to because Swami rejected the whole discussion. But is the diamond higher than a ruby? You know, do you go through all the gemstones? Is it related to the planet that the gemstone corresponds with? But the first question I asked, which didn't get anywhere, was, how long are you a diamond before you get to go on to the next step? So the clarity thought it was a really dumb question. I was confident enough in myself to say I thought it was really interesting. I wasn't deterred by the mere fact. I don't know if he used the word dumb, but he did not respect the question. Let's just put it like that. But what has happened many times, and I knew it, was that he'll reject it first and then he'll answer it. So he did it. He rejected it first, and then he said, all time is short compared to eternity. So there's no context for asking the question. It's one of those things like, if you have to ask the question, you can't comprehend the answer. But all time is short compared to eternity tells me that it didn't matter when Babaji became liberated. And this is the important part. At one point he wasn't. And at one point he lived on the vibration of consciousness that I'm living on and that everybody's living on. He went through all of it, assuming they all started out as diamonds and made it through. So nothing that I'm doing is either shocking or disappointing to the masters. It's, well, given who you are, as Swami gloriously once said when he was talking about, someone's doing very well considering who they are. That became one of our absolute favorite. I think I'm doing very well considering who I am. And that's how the masters look at us. Well, considering that you're at that vibration of consciousness, what else would you do? And then some part of them can say, I remember. Swami's beautiful line once, there was a controversial situation in Ananda, which Swami was allowing others to resolve, but everybody was calling him and talking to him and presenting their side of the story. Swami was marvelous. To each person, he said, I understand why you feel that way. And he did. Given who you are, it would be natural for you to feel that way. I understand why you feel that way. So when I or you find yourself clinging, unreasonably clinging to something you would rather let go of, I would rather let go of, but there I've got both my fists and all my heart just clinging to it. I'm doing pretty well considering who I am. And sooner or later, I'll get this right. And Babaji remembers, and he's standing with me, he's standing in me, he's standing as me, strategizing. Given who you are, how are we going to loosen your grip? But there's a simplicity to the spiritual path, which is exactly in this line. I'm going to be loyal to the choice I've made. It's a love relationship I've committed myself to, and merely because I'm being a bit of a twit at the moment, and I'm clinging to some selfish little thing which is not going to further this love relationship. My commitment is not to my delusion. My commitment is to my aspiration. And this is coming back to what Master said, because I trust myself. I know what I have experienced. That is the power of our spiritual path, not Master's greatness. That's the given. The greatness is that I trust what I have experienced, and I will be loyal to my own experience, come what may. Because all time is short compared to eternity. And once we step out of it, it's all just, so they tell us, just shadow and light. And everything we thought was suffering wasn't even suffering. We just misunderstood. And what relief now that the misunderstanding is resolved in the bliss of our own nature. God bless you, my friends.